My name is Susan Morrison Citrin. I was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico in 1947, and my parents were Martin Morrison, Annabelle Magidson Morrison, and my grandparents were Albert and Sarah Magidson, who started Magidson's restaurant. Well, my grandfather actually in the 20s had ladies ready to wear, 5 of them stores, and lost them in the Depression, and somehow managed to open up a restaurant in Chicago in the mid-30s, even during the Depression. But he had a friend in Albuquerque, New Mexico, who said, "Albert, come to Albuquerque, we need a good corned beef sandwich." So he had already been in the restaurant business in Chicago, and he moved my grandmother to Albuquerque, to the Wild West, from Chicago in 1938 and opened a Jewish deli on Route 66. The restaurant was located really right in the commercial center of Albuquerque. Actually, at that time, there was not much east of Carlisle Boulevard. So they really were in the commercial center between 1st and 2nd Street on Central Avenue. That was where all the businesses were, the attorneys. It was a very small town at that time. The deli was not a totally kosher deli. It was kosher style. They did not serve pork products there. But my grandmother brought all the traditional Eastern European foods from her family recipes to Albuquerque, taught them to many of the Hispanic cooks, including things like kugel and matzo balls, chicken soups, rugula, brisket of beef, barley soup, sweet and sour cabbage soup, many of the just traditional foods. My grandfather arranged to have a local bakery here in Albuquerque bake the rye bread, and he had a recipe from, I can't tell you exactly where the recipe was, but he approached Valley Gold, and they developed a specific sour cream just for Magidson's restaurant. Valley Gold was our local dairy here in Albuquerque. Both my brother and I worked at the restaurant. It was a very good lesson for us to know that the family contributes and makes a success of an enterprise. My brother bussed tables. We both of us learned how to use the cash register and give change, learned how to slice the corned beef and pastrami. We made sandwiches. We learned how to wrap the sandwiches to go with the little pickle inside the wax paper. So we were given a lot of responsibility. I bussed tables sometimes, but my brother was older than I, and of course he was a male, so it was more appropriate that he bussed tables. And the captain's table was a gathering table for the businessmen in Albuquerque. They would come about 10 o'clock for their coffee break and sit around talking, schmoozing, and it was a multicultural group. There were Hispanic businessmen and the Jewish businessmen. Peter Domenici, part of the Italian community, who was our state senator, always maintained that he's got to start at Magidson's restaurant. So it was a jolly group of people, and as a young person, I wondered, what are these people doing just hanging out at the restaurant? My perception of Magidson's was, it was like a Jewish community center. People heard about it when they first came to town. They came to Magidson's network. They found out about the synagogue, the temple, whatever resources there were. It was kind of like a big home. They welcomed people into the restaurant. My Albert and Sarah, my grandparents, were called Mama and Papa. Adult people actually called them Mama and Papa. And of course the food was like Hamish, was like down to earth. It was like going into somebody's home. So the food was good, but I think what stands out in my mind that it was a nurturing, welcoming place for people to come and gather. My dad left the restaurant when it moved, and he went to banking. He worked for Albuquerque National Bank. Connie Nellos loved my father because he was the only one who advocated my father helped the Nellis boys get their business started, and nobody wanted to give them a loan. And my father Connie kind of adopted my father as his own father. My grandmother had a very difficult time moving to Albuquerque. It was a big loss for her because all of her family was in Chicago. And this Albuquerque was like the Wild West. You know, there were chickens in the neighborhood. They moved to Aliso initially, and there were chickens running around the streets. And it was a bitter pill for my grandmother, but she adapted, and they made friends, and they had a good community of friends as the community grew.